The recording device clicked off, the sound sharp in the stillness of the dimly lit room. Gerry Kane, a disillusioned NASA engineer, sat frozen, headphones still pressed against his ears. His trembling hands hovered over a cassette tape labeled Project Selene, classified in bold red letters. On the tape, a voice spoke calmly, matter-of-factly. The moon landing was staged. The truth must remain hidden at all costs. The summer of 1969 was electric with anticipation. The United States, embroiled in the Cold War, needed a victory, something monumental to assert its dominance over the Soviet Union. The Apollo 11 mission wasn't just a scientific endeavor. It was a declaration of supremacy. For Gerry Kane, then a bright-eyed systems engineer at NASA, it was the pinnacle of his career. At the time, Gerry was part of the telemetry analysis team for the Saturn V rocket. His role was critical, but behind the scenes, monitoring real-time data from sensors embedded in the rocket systems. He'd spent years working on the Apollo program, pulling endless nights to ensure every calculation was precise. His colleagues joked that Gerry was married to the data, more invested in the numbers than in his personal life. On July 20th, 1969, Gerry watched from NASA's mission control as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history. The room erupted in cheers when Armstrong's voice crackled through the speakers. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Gerry felt a surge of pride, a deep sense of purpose as the world celebrated humanity's greatest achievement. But even in that euphoric moment, something nagged at him, a flicker of doubt buried beneath the adrenaline. After the mission, Gerry's team was tasked with analyzing telemetry logs from Apollo 11. It was standard procedure, a way to ensure that every aspect of the mission had gone as planned. But as Gerry combed through the data, he noticed irregularities. First, there were the power fluctuations during the TLI, translunar injection, phase, where the spacecraft accelerated to escape Earth's orbit. The readings were unusually clean, too perfect, almost as if they'd been smoothed out. Then there was the signal delay, or lack thereof. Radio transmissions from the moon should have included a slight delay due to the distance, but some of the transmissions seemed instantaneous. Probably just an error in the recording equipment, Gerry told himself. But his instincts, honed by years of working with sensitive data, wouldn't let it go. The tipping point came when he reviewed images from the moon's surface. As a systems engineer, Gerry wasn't trained to analyze photography, but even to his untrained eye, something looked off. The shadows in the images didn't align with the expected light source, the sun. Instead, they suggested multiple light sources like stage lights. When Gerry brought his concerns to his supervisor, he was met with a dismissive wave. "You're overthinking it, Kane. The mission was a success. Focus on the data we need for Apollo 12. But the seed of doubt had been planted. In the months following Apollo 11, Gerry began hearing strange comments from colleagues. Most were cryptic, offhand remarks that could have been chalked up to gallows humor or stress. But as the rumors accumulated, they painted a troubling picture. At a routine calibration meeting, a technician muttered under his breath, "Funny how we never had to test the comms delay, huh?" When Gerry pressed him on what he meant, the technician clammed up, refusing to elaborate. At a Christmas party that year, another engineer, already a few drinks in, joked about how the Nevada desert makes a hell of a moonscape. The room erupted in laughter, but Gerry's stomach tightened. Then, during a maintenance check on a telemetry server, Gerry overheard two senior scientists arguing in hushed tones. One said, "If this ever gets out, the whole program's finished." The other replied, "It won't. Nobody's looking that closely." Gerry's unease grew. He began staying late at the office, digging through archive files and telemetry logs, looking for anything that might confirm his suspicions. As Gerry delved deeper, he started connecting dots he hadn't considered before. He remembered the pressure NASA had faced in the years leading up to Apollo 11. The Soviet Union had been winning the space race. They'd launched the first satellite, the first man into orbit, the first spacecraft to the moon. By comparison, the U.S. had struggled with high-profile failures, including the Apollo 1 disaster that claimed the lives of 3 astronauts. By 1968, political pressure on NASA was immense. President Lyndon B. Johnson had made it clear America had to land on the moon before the decade was out, no matter the cost. Failure wasn't an option, not with the world watching. Gerry began to wonder, what if the stakes had been too high? What if, faced with the possibility of losing to the Soviets, someone in the upper echelons of power had decided to fake it? He started compiling a mental list of questions. Why had NASA built a massive soundstage at a remote Nevada location during the same period as Apollo 11? Why had budget reports from that era included unexplained expenses for high-end camera equipment and lighting rigs? Why had certain Apollo engineers been reassigned or quietly dismissed? After the mission, in 1973, Gerry was reassigned to a desk job as part of widespread budget cuts to the Apollo program. The shift was a blow to his ego, but it also gave him access to old mission data and classified archives. One evening, while sorting through a cluttered file drawer, Gerry came across a folder marked Project Selene, confidential. The name meant nothing to him, but the contents sent a chill down his spine. The folder contained a series of requisition orders for equipment he recognized: Panavision cameras, high-powered studio lights, and mock-up lunar modules. There were memos discussing secondary filming locations and notes about ensuring visual consistency with live broadcasts. At the bottom of the folder was a single, unlabeled cassette tape. Intrigued, Gerry borrowed an old recorder and played the tape. The voice on the recording was calm, authoritative, and devoid of emotion. Project Selene is proceeding as planned. Filming begins July 12th. The final footage must be indistinguishable from reality. The Soviets cannot win. This is about more than the moon. This is about ensuring America's place in history. Gerry sat frozen, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him. If the tape was real, it confirmed his worst fears. The moon landing had been staged. The cassette tape with the words Project Selene, classified, scrawled across it sat on Gerry's desk like a ticking bomb. The words spoken on the recording played over and over in his head. Filming begins July 12th. The final footage must be indistinguishable from reality. The Soviets cannot win. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a rogue operation. It was a deliberate and calculated deception, one involving the highest levels of NASA, the U.S. government, and possibly beyond. Gerry knew he couldn't ignore what he'd found. But the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. Gerry spent the next several weeks combing through the archive room, carefully selecting files that seemed connected to Project Selene. He worked late into the night, poring over requisition orders, engineering schematics, and handwritten notes scrawled in the margins of memos. One document stood out: a detailed list of camera equipment rented in 1968. The items were far more sophisticated than anything used for actual space missions, and the vendor listed was a high-end Hollywood production company. Next to the equipment list was a shipping address, not NASA's headquarters, but a remote facility in the Nevada desert. Gerry remembered the rumors about the Nevada site. Officially, it was a testing ground for lunar rover prototypes. Unofficially, it was known as Stage 2, a nickname whispered among engineers with nervous laughter. Another document caught his eye, a budget report marked for internal use only. It contained large sums allocated to set construction, lighting, and visual effects consultation. The report named a single point of contact, someone identified only as G. Cutter. The more Gerry read, the clearer it became. Project Selene wasn't a contingency plan. It was the plan. The file also contained a series of correspondences with an unnamed Hollywood director, someone referred to only by their initials. SK, the letters were vague, but they hinted at a working relationship between this director and the government. One memo read, SK has reviewed the footage and provided feedback on maintaining consistency with the live broadcast. Revisions will require additional funding, but are deemed critical to ensuring authenticity. Gerry's pulse quickened. Hollywood wasn't just consulted. They were involved in creating the greatest illusion in history. Desperate for answers, Gerry began reaching out to contacts he'd made during his years at NASA. Most brushed him off or claimed ignorance. But one former technician, who'd retired shortly after Apollo 11, agreed to meet him under strict conditions. Gerry met the man, James Jimmy Randall, in a dimly lit bar just outside Houston. Jimmy looked over his shoulder constantly, his hands fidgeting as he sipped his drink. "You were part of the Apollo 11 team," Gerry began cautiously. Jimmy nodded, but didn't speak. "I found some files," Gerry continued. "Project Selene, requisition orders for cameras, set construction, memos about secondary locations. What were we doing out there, Jimmy?" Jimmy's eyes darted around the room. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Gerry snapped. "I've seen the records. I know something was staged. Just tell me the truth." Jimmy sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "You're digging into something you don't understand," he said quietly. "Something that'll get you killed if you're not careful." Gerry leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I need to know." Jimmy hesitated, then finally spoke. "The landing, it wasn't real. Not completely." "What do you mean, not completely?" "They tried," Jimmy said. "They really tried to make it happen. But the tech wasn't ready. The radiation, the telemetry, the lander, it was all a gamble. And they couldn't afford to lose. Not with the Soviets breathing down our necks. So, they hedged their bets. By faking it," Gerry said, his voice flat. Jimmy nodded. "They built the set months in advance. Took weeks to film everything. They even had Armstrong and Aldrin rehearse their lines. The footage you saw on TV, that wasn't live. It was pre-recorded." Gerry's mind raced. "And the Soviets? They didn't know?" Jimmy laughed bitterly. "Of course they knew, but they couldn't prove it. And even if they could, admitting we faked it would mean admitting they lost to a lie." Armed with this knowledge, Gerry returned to the tape. He played it over and over, catching new details with each listen. One section stood out. "The Soviets have Luna 15 in orbit. Their reconnaissance capabilities are improving. Ensure no discrepancies are visible in the live feed." Gerry remembered Luna 15, a Soviet spacecraft that had coincidentally entered lunar orbit during the Apollo 11 mission. At the time, it was dismissed as unrelated. But now, it seemed like the Soviets had been trying to gather evidence of the deception. The implications were staggering. Not only had NASA faked the landing, but the lie had shaped the trajectory of the Cold War itself. The more Gerry uncovered, the more isolated he felt. He couldn't share what he'd found with his colleagues, many of whom had worked on Apollo 11 and believed in its success wholeheartedly. Going to the press was equally risky. Without hard evidence, he'd be dismissed as a crackpot. And then there were the black cars. They started appearing outside his house late at night. Always the same make and model. Always idling just long enough for Gerry to notice before driving away. At first, he told himself it was paranoia. But when he noticed one parked outside his office at NASA, his blood ran cold. They knew. One evening, while reviewing more files in the archive room, Gerry found a second cassette tape. This one was labeled Selene, Contingency. His hands shook as he loaded it into the recorder. The voice on this tape was different, harsher, more impatient. "If this ever leaks, the official position is clear. Deny everything. Discredit the source. If necessary, remove the threat." Gerry's breath caught. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a conspiracy with no bounds, and he was now caught in its web. He realized he couldn't stay silent. But exposing the truth would mean risking everything. His career, his reputation, and maybe even his life. Gerry sat in his dimly lit apartment, the pieces of the conspiracy scattered across his coffee table. Photos, memos, requisition orders, and the two damning tapes. He stared at them, his mind racing. The implications were too massive to ignore. But what could he do? Who would believe him? Every option felt like a trap. If he went to his superiors at NASA, he'd be labeled a lunatic or quietly silenced. If he approached the media, they'd laugh him out of the room, unless someone stopped him before he even got there. His phone rang, breaking the silence. Gerry nearly jumped out of his chair. He hesitated before picking it up. "Gerry Kane." The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped. "Yes," Gerry said cautiously. "This is Laura Mitchell. I'm an investigative journalist with the Chronicle. I heard from a mutual contact that you have a story worth telling." Gerry froze. He had considered reaching out to Laura, a reporter with a reputation for exposing government corruption, but he hadn't told anyone his plan. "Who told you that?" Gerry asked, his voice low. "Let's just say someone who knows you're not the only one asking questions," Laura replied. I think we should meet. Gerry agreed to meet Laura at a diner just outside Houston, choosing a booth in the corner where they wouldn't be overheard. Laura arrived carrying a leather satchel and an air of confidence that put Gerry on edge. "Let me guess," Laura said as she slid into the seat across from him. "You've got evidence that could change everything, but you're too scared to do anything with it." Gerry narrowed his eyes. "I don't know you. For all I know, you're part of the same system trying to keep this quiet." Laura smirked. "If I was, we wouldn't be talking. Look, I'm here because someone trusted me enough to send me your way. So, are you going to show me what you've got? Or are we just going to stare at each other all night?" Reluctantly, Gerry slid the tapes and a folder of documents across the table. "This is everything I've found so far," he said. "But it's dangerous. They already know I'm looking into it." Laura opened the folder, her expression growing more serious with each page she read. When she finally played the first tape, her jaw tightened. This is huge," she said quietly. "If this is real, it's not just about the moon landing. It's about control, propaganda, funding, power. The whole space race could have been built on a lie." Gerry nodded. "And it's bigger than just NASA. The military's involved, maybe even intelligence agencies. They've spent billions on black budget projects, and this lie was the key to funding it all." Laura leaned back, her mind racing. "We can't sit on this. But going public, it's going to paint a target on your back." "On our backs," Gerry corrected. Over the next several weeks, Gerry and Laura worked together to verify the evidence. Laura used her contacts in the journalism world to track down former NASA employees, Hollywood insiders, and government contractors who might know more about Project Selene. One former studio technician confirmed that he had been hired in 1968 for a classified government project involving lunar landscapes. "They paid me double my usual rate," the man admitted over the phone. "Never saw anything like it. Giant soundstages, fake rocks, the works. They said it was for training astronauts, but it felt off." Another source, a retired Air Force officer, recalled unusual shipments to a Nevada base. "They called it equipment testing, but we weren't testing anything," he said. "We were moving props, lunar landers, cameras, lighting rigs. It didn't make sense at the time, but looking back, the evidence was mounting, but so were the risks. It started with small things." Gerry noticed his mail being opened and resealed, his car running strangely as if tampered with. Laura's office was ransacked one night, though nothing seemed to be stolen. Then came the phone calls, static-filled messages where no one spoke, just heavy breathing on the other end of the line. "They know," Laura said one evening as they met at her apartment. "We're making noise, and they're getting nervous." Gerry nodded grimly. "That means we're on to something real." But the pressure only intensified. One morning, Gerry found a note slipped under his apartment door. It read, "This isn't your fight. Walk away while you still can." Laura received a similar message, written on the back of a photograph of her and Gerry meeting at the diner. "We're being watched," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't just intimidation. They want us to know they can get to us anytime, anywhere." Faced with growing threats, Gerry and Laura decided to take the first step in exposing the conspiracy. They leaked fragments of their findings to underground forums and encrypted websites frequented by conspiracy theorists. Photos of lunar sets appeared online, alongside memos discussing visual consistency for public broadcast. Gerry also uploaded a short clip from the first tape, where the voice spoke of ensuring no discrepancies in the live feed. The internet lit up. Forums and chat rooms exploded with debates, theories, and accusations. Some dismissed the leaks as fake, but others were convinced they had finally found proof of the moon landing hoax. Mainstream media picked up on the buzz, though they approached it cautiously. "Are the Apollo missions a lie?" asked one headline. New evidence sparks debate over NASA's greatest achievement. NASA was quick to deny the claims. In an official statement, they called the leaks baseless and an insult to the thousands of people who worked on the Apollo program. But behind closed doors, the agency went into crisis mode. One night, while reviewing documents in his apartment, Gerry heard the unmistakable sound of someone trying to pick his lock. Heart pounding, he grabbed the tapes and climbed out the back window, fleeing into the night. He called Laura from a payphone. "They're here. They're trying to get into my place. Meet me at the safe house, she said, her voice tense. We need to regroup. When Gerry arrived, Laura was already there, her laptop open and a cigarette trembling between her fingers. We've stirred up a hornet's nest, she said. They're not just trying to intimidate us anymore. They're trying to erase us. Gerry looked at her, his face pale but determined. Then we go bigger. We release everything. The decision to go public wasn't made lightly. Gerry and Laura knew that once they released everything, there would be no going back. Every move would be scrutinized, every step shadowed. But with the evidence they had amassed, silence was no longer an option. The two sat in Laura's dimly lit apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers, photographs, and 2 cassette tapes, the heart of their discovery. Laura typed furiously on her laptop, encrypting files and preparing to upload the first wave of their findings to a secure server. This has to be airtight, Laura said, her voice steady but tense. Once it's out there, they'll hit us with everything they've got. Discredit us, silence us, whatever it takes. Gerry nodded, though his stomach churned with anxiety. We can't let them bury this, he said. People deserve to know the truth. The first wave of leaks hit the internet like a bomb. Laura's carefully crafted dossier included photographs of what appeared to be a lunar set, high-resolution images showing mock-up lunar modules surrounded by lighting rigs with shadows that didn't align, internal memos discussing visual consistency for public broadcasts and payments to a Hollywood studio for consultation, audio clips from the first cassette tape, including the damning line. The final footage must be indistinguishable from reality. The Soviets cannot win. The reaction was explosive. Conspiracy forums went into overdrive, dissecting every detail. Social media was flooded with hashtags like hashtag #MoonLandingHoax, hashtag Project Selene, and hashtag ApolloTruth. News outlets hesitated at first, unsure whether to legitimize the claims, but the sheer volume of online chatter forced them to cover the story. Are we living a lie? Asked one major news anchor during a primetime broadcast. New evidence challenges the authenticity of humanity's greatest achievement. NASA issued a swift denial, calling the leaks a baseless attack on the integrity of the Apollo program. But the pressure was mounting. Politicians began calling for an investigation, and polls showed a growing number of Americans doubting the moon landing. Gerry and Laura didn't have long to celebrate their success. Within days, the threats intensified. One morning, Laura woke to find her car vandalized, the word liar spray-painted across the hood. Gerry's apartment was broken into again, this time with nothing stolen, but his files ransacked and scattered across the floor. Then came the calls, always from unlisted numbers, always the same chilling silence on the other end. They're panicking, Laura said during a tense phone call with Gerry. They're trying to scare us into backing off. It's not going to work, Gerry replied, though his hands trembled as he clutched the phone. But the turning point came when Laura received an anonymous package at her office. Inside was a photograph, a blurry image of a man in a spacesuit standing beneath a scaffold with visible stage lights overhead. The back of the photo read, "This was just the beginning." The photo reignited Gerry and Laura's investigation. It wasn't just another piece of proof. It hinted at a broader conspiracy. Using metadata embedded in the photograph, Laura traced its origin to a long-defunct military contractor tied to Project Selene. The contractor, listed under the codename Aegis Dynamics, had operated several classified facilities in the late 1960s, including one in Nevada. Gerry and Laura pieced together a troubling timeline. In 1968, Aegis Dynamics oversaw the construction of a massive soundstage designed to replicate the lunar surface. During the Apollo missions, Aegis received millions in payments for consultation and logistics support. Employees who worked on the project either disappeared or signed airtight non-disclosure agreements enforced by military-grade intimidation. The deeper they dug, the more Gerry and Laura realized the moon landing hoax was just the tip of the iceberg. Late one night, as Laura sifted through decrypted files, she stumbled upon a document labeled Lunar Contingency Initiative. The text inside made her blood run cold. It detailed plans for using the moon landing hoax to justify future space militarization. By convincing the world of America's technological superiority, the government could secure funding for black-budget projects aimed at developing orbital weapons platforms and advanced surveillance systems. This was never just about beating the Soviets, Laura said, her voice trembling as she read the file aloud to Gerry. It was about control, controlling space, controlling the narrative, controlling the future. The document also referenced a secondary operation called Horizon Shadow, which appeared to involve disinformation campaigns targeting anyone who questioned the moon landing's authenticity. They've been planning this for decades, Gerry said, his face pale, and we're walking right into their trap. As Gerry and Laura prepared to release the next wave of evidence, they noticed something strange. Their initial uploads had begun disappearing from the internet. Files were scrubbed from servers, posts deleted from forums, and accounts banned without explanation. "They're erasing us," Laura said, her voice sharp with frustration. "They're wiping everything clean." The pair scrambled to secure backups and upload their findings to new platforms, but the pressure was mounting. Every step forward felt like a race against an invisible clock. Then came the letter, delivered to Laura's office. It contained a single sentence: "This is your final warning." Inside the envelope was a second photo, this one showing Gerry and Laura meeting at the diner weeks earlier. "They've been watching us from the start," Gerry said, his voice barely above a whisper. With their safety increasingly at risk, Gerry and Laura faced a difficult decision. Release everything they had, including the most damning evidence, or disappear and hope the story they'd already leaked would gain traction on its own. "We have to finish this," Gerry said during a tense meeting in a safe house. "If we stop now, they win. They'll bury everything, and no one will ever know the truth." Laura nodded, though her face was etched with worry. "Then we need to go big. No more pieces. We drop everything at once: files, tapes, photos, names. Make it impossible for them to silence us." As they prepared for their final move, Gerry couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows outside the safe house seemed darker, the silence heavier. But they had come too far to back down. The decision to release all the evidence weighed heavily on Gerry and Laura. They knew the risks, knew that once the truth was out, they would become targets. But they also knew the stakes were too high to stop. Late one night, the pair worked in Laura's cramped apartment, surrounded by stacks of files, tapes, and hastily scrawled notes. The tension was palpable, their exhaustion evident. Gerry sipped from a cold cup of coffee while Laura tapped furiously on her laptop, encrypting the final batch of files. "This is it," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Once this goes live, we can't take it back." Gerry nodded, swallowing hard. "Let's make it count." The next day, Gerry returned to his apartment to find the door slightly ajar. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he pushed the door open, his heart pounding in his chest. The living room was a wreck. Papers were strewn across the floor, drawers pulled out, and furniture overturned. The only thing untouched was the small coffee table in the center of the room, where a cassette tape lay shattered into pieces. Next to it was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Gerry picked it up, his hands trembling, and read the message: "Stop now." He staggered backward, his mind racing. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were in his home. Gerry called Laura, his voice shaking as he explained what had happened. "They were here," he said. "They smashed the tape and left a warning." Laura's voice was calm but firm. "Pack a bag and get out of there. Don't stay another second. We'll meet at the safe house." Gerry didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed what little he could and fled, glancing nervously over his shoulder as he drove through the quiet streets. At the safe house, Laura was already waiting, her laptop open and a cigarette burning in the ashtray beside her. She didn't smoke often, but tonight the stress was visible in every movement. "They're ramping up the intimidation," she said. "This isn't just about scaring us anymore. They want to shut us down for good." Gerry nodded, his face pale. "Then we're running out of time." Determined to stay ahead of their pursuers, Gerry and Laura doubled down on their efforts. As they reviewed the last of their files, they stumbled upon a second cassette tape Gerry had overlooked during his initial discovery. It was labeled simply Selene, contingency. The tape's contents were even more damning than the first. A voice, sharp and impatient, outlined a plan to deal with potential leaks. If this ever comes to light, the voice said, the official position is clear. Deny everything. Discredit the source. If necessary, remove the threat. The voice continued, describing in chilling detail how whistleblowers would be handled. Financial ruin, character assassination, even physical elimination. Laura paused the tape, her face pale. This is a hit list, she said quietly. They're not just covering their tracks, they're hunting people down. Gerry leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation settling over him. That means we're on it, he said. That night, Gerry decided to retrieve a stash of documents he'd hidden at his old apartment. Laura urged him not to go, but Gerry was insistent. Those files could make the difference, he said. I'll be in and out. As he approached the apartment, the street was eerily quiet. Gerry parked a block away and approached on foot, his senses on high alert. Inside, the apartment was exactly as he'd left it after the break-in. Papers scattered, furniture overturned. But as he stepped into the living room, he heard it, the faint creak of a floorboard behind him. Gerry spun around just in time to see a figure in the shadows, a man in a dark suit with a blank expression. Mr. Kane, the man said, his voice cold. We need to talk. The man didn't draw a weapon, but his presence was enough to freeze Gerry in place. You're making a mistake, the man continued. You're meddling in things you don't understand. Gerry found his voice, though it trembled. I understand enough. The world deserves to know the truth. The man tilted his head, almost amused. The truth, he said. The truth is irrelevant. What matters is control. And right now, you're threatening to disrupt it. Gerry clenched his fists. You're not going to scare me off. The man's smile faded. This isn't a warning, Mr. Kane. It's a promise. Walk away, or you'll regret it. With that, the man turned and left, disappearing into the night. Gerry's knees nearly buckled as the adrenaline drained from his body. When Gerry returned to the safe house, Laura immediately noticed his shaken state. What happened, she asked. They're done playing games, Gerry said, his voice hollow. One of them was waiting for me. Told me to walk away. Laura's eyes hardened. Then we're closer than we thought. They wouldn't be this aggressive if we weren't a threat. Gerry nodded, though his fear was palpable. We need to move faster. Get everything out before they shut us down. Laura agreed. We'll do it tonight. Everything. All the files, the photos, the tapes. If they want to silence us, we'll make sure the truth is too loud to ignore. As the two worked through the night, the tension was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound from outside, made them jump. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that time was running out. By dawn, they had everything prepared. Laura hit the upload button, sending their evidence to dozens of encrypted servers and trusted contacts around the world. It's done, she said, leaning back in her chair with a deep exhale. Gerry nodded, though the sense of victory was tempered by the knowledge of what might come next. Now we wait, he said quietly. The truth was out, but the danger had only just begun. The evidence Gerry and Laura released spread like wildfire. Within hours, the photos, audio tapes, and documents were mirrored on dozens of encrypted servers and forums, making it nearly impossible to erase. Social media exploded with hashtags like hashtag #MoonLandingHoax, hashtag Project Selene, and hashtag #ExposeNASA trending worldwide. What had started as whispers in conspiracy circles became a full-blown global phenomenon. News outlets scrambled to cover the leaks, with round-the-clock panels debating their authenticity. For the first time, the idea that the moon landing might have been fake moved from the fringes of society into the mainstream consciousness. Online, conspiracy theorists dissected every frame of the leaked photos, every word of the audio tapes. Users identified details in the photos, reflections in astronauts' visors that showed what appeared to be studio lights, footprints in the lunar dust that didn't match the treads on the boots used in the mission. Audio engineers analyzed the tapes, pointing out subtle inconsistencies in the recording's fidelity, proof, they argued, that the transmissions had been staged. Skeptics pushed back, calling the leaks a coordinated hoax. These photos could have been doctored, one prominent debunker said during a live-stream debate. In those tapes, anyone could fake a voice recording, but the volume of evidence was overwhelming. Even skeptics were forced to admit that some of the questions raised by the leaks were valid. The major news networks couldn't ignore the story. What began as cautious reporting quickly escalated into a media frenzy. CNN ran a special segment titled, Apollo 11, Triumph or Deception? The New York Times published an in-depth investigative piece exploring NASA's history of secrecy and black budget spending. Talk shows became battlegrounds, with former NASA officials vehemently defending the Apollo program against accusations of fraud. NASA issued repeated statements denying the allegations. The Apollo missions represent one of humanity's greatest achievements, said the agency's administrator in a televised press conference. The claims being made are baseless and disrespectful to the thousands of dedicated individuals who made the moon landing possible. But the denials only fueled public curiosity. If NASA was so confident in its truth, why not open its archives for independent review? The leaks didn't just shake public confidence. They disrupted global geopolitics. In Moscow, Soviet officials seized the opportunity to demand an international investigation into the Apollo program. If the United States deceived the world, it undermines the legitimacy of the entire space race, one Russian diplomat declared during a United Nations session. China, already skeptical of U.S. dominance in space exploration, issued a formal statement condemning the alleged deception. If these allegations are true, a Chinese spokesperson said, they call into question all American claims of technological superiority. Even America's allies expressed concern. European nations, many of which had collaborated with NASA on later missions, call for transparency. If the Apollo program is built on lies, said a German minister, it erodes trust in all scientific endeavors. At home, political pressure mounted. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle called for congressional hearings, demanding NASA account for the discrepancies revealed in the leaks. As the controversy grew, the streets erupted. Protesters gathered outside NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., holding signs that read, #TruthOverLies and Show Us the Moon. Counter-protesters defended the space agency, chanting, "We believe," and NASA made history. The division wasn't just public. It seeped into every aspect of society. Families argued at dinner tables. Co-workers clashed over water coolers. Social media became a battleground, with arguments spilling into heated personal attacks. And then there were the conspiracy theorists, who took the leaks even further. Some claimed the fake moon landing was just the beginning, part of a larger plan involving alien contact or secret government programs to colonize Mars. For Gerry and Laura, the fallout was personal and immediate. Their names were leaked online within days of the release, making them public figures overnight. Gerry was branded a traitor by former colleagues, who accused him of undermining the legacy of the Apollo program. Laura faced intense scrutiny from her peers in journalism, some of whom accused her of sensationalism and reckless reporting. Their lives became a whirlwind of media appearances, death threats, and lawsuits. Protesters gathered outside Laura's apartment, shouting insults and holding signs that read, "Hoaxers die." Gerry, meanwhile, was forced into hiding after receiving a chilling letter. "We know where you are." But the hardest part was the guilt. "I thought exposing the truth would make things better," Gerry said during a rare interview. "But all I've done is tear people apart." Faced with mounting pressure, NASA made a shocking announcement. It would open its archives to a select group of independent investigators. "This is an opportunity to put the rumors to rest once and for all," the agency's spokesperson said. The move was bold, but it backfired. The investigators quickly found discrepancies in the official records, gaps in telemetry data, missing video footage, and financial irregularities that raised more questions than answers. Public trust in NASA plummeted. Funding for future missions was slashed as lawmakers questioned whether the agency deserved billions in taxpayer dollars. As the moon landing conspiracy unraveled, humanity found itself at a crossroads. The Apollo missions had been a symbol of human ingenuity and ambition, but now that symbol was tarnished. In schools, textbooks were rewritten to include the controversy. In workplaces, employees debated whether space exploration itself was worth pursuing. Even Hollywood got involved, with filmmakers rushing to capitalize on the scandal with movies and documentaries. But for Gerry and Laura, the question remained, was exposing the truth worth the cost? The chaos Gerry and Laura unleashed was unstoppable. Their evidence had set the world ablaze, exposing fractures in the foundation of a global narrative that had united humanity for decades. But they had also made powerful enemies. For weeks, they'd been in hiding, moving between safe houses and relying on encrypted communication to stay ahead of those who wanted to silence them. But the pressure was mounting. Threats came not just from shadowy figures, but also from the public. Protesters outside Laura's apartment grew louder, demanding her arrest for treason. Online, conspiracy theorists spun wild tales about Gerry and Laura being double agents or disinformation operatives. The world was spiraling, and they were caught in the center. The second tape, labeled Selene, Contingency, had been their trump card, a damning piece of evidence detailing the lengths to which NASA and its affiliates were willing to go to protect the secret. On the tape, a cold, detached voice discussed methods for silencing whistleblowers, including character assassination, financial ruin, and even permanent solutions. Laura uploaded the tape to every platform they could access. This wasn't just about the moon landing anymore. This was about systemic corruption and abuse of power at the highest levels of government. The public's reaction was immediate and visceral. Headlines read, NASA's dark secrets. Who knew what and when? Talk show hosts debated whether the agency should be dismantled entirely. Protesters demanded not just an investigation into the Apollo program, but a complete overhaul of space exploration policies. But the release of the second tape came with consequences. That same night, Laura's safe house was breached. It happened at 2:17 a.m. The sound of breaking glass jolted Laura awake. Gerry, already paranoid from weeks of living on edge, grabbed the laptop and files they had been working on and shoved them into a bag. Go, he hissed. Laura didn't hesitate. The pair scrambled out the back door just as shadowy figures stormed the front. Gerry caught a glimpse of their faces, emotionless, methodical. These weren't random thugs. These were professionals. The two ran through the darkened streets, ducking into alleyways and side streets to evade their pursuers. Gerry's heart pounded as he clutched the bag of evidence. If they were caught, everything would be lost. Laura's contacts had set up an emergency fallback location, a storage unit on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was secure. When they arrived, Laura locked the door behind them and collapsed onto a metal chair, her face pale. They're not just trying to scare us anymore, she said, her voice trembling. They want us gone. Gerry paced the room, his thoughts racing. We got one last shot, he said. We need to get this to someone who can protect it, someone who can finish what we started. Laura nodded. There's one person I trust, she said. A senator. She's been critical of NASA for years and has the resources to blow this wide open. The next day, Laura arranged a clandestine meeting with Senator Evelyn Harlow, a fierce advocate for government transparency. The meeting took place in the basement of a library, far from prying eyes. Senator Harlow listened intently as Gerry and Laura presented their findings. The photos, the memos, the tapes, it was undeniable. This is bigger than I imagined, Harlow said, her expression grave. If even half of this is true, it's going to destroy public trust in our institutions. That trust is already gone, Gerry said. We just gave people the proof they needed. Harlow nodded. I'll take this to the Senate. But you two need to disappear. Once this goes public, they'll come for you with everything they've got. Days later, Senator Harlow held a press conference on the steps of the Capitol. Flanked by reporters and photographers, she outlined the findings Gerry and Laura had uncovered. She played excerpts from the tapes and displayed key documents, calling for an immediate investigation into NASA and the Apollo program. The fallout was unprecedented. Congressional hearings were announced, with top NASA officials subpoenaed to testify. International pressure mounted, with calls for the United Nations to conduct an independent review of the Apollo missions. Protests reached a fever pitch, with crowds demanding answers and accountability. But behind the scenes, Gerry and Laura knew their fight wasn't over. One night, as Gerry and Laura sat in the dimly lit storage unit, their burner phones buzzed simultaneously. Each message contained the same chilling warning. You've gone too far. This ends now. Minutes later, the power in the unit flickered, and the sound of tires screeching echoed outside. Gerry and Laura exchanged a panicked glance. "They've found us," Laura whispered. Gerry grabbed the bag of evidence, his heart racing. "We can't let them get this." As the door to the storage unit began to creak open, Gerry and Laura prepared for what felt like the final stand. The storage unit was bathed in dim light as the metal door creaked open. Gerry and Laura stood frozen, their hearts pounding in unison. Shadows spilled into the room, and the faint shuffle of boots echoed off the concrete walls. "They're here," Laura whispered, clutching the laptop bag that held their remaining evidence. Gerry nodded, his eyes darting toward the back exit. "We have to get out. Now!" The door burst open fully, revealing 3 men in dark tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks. The leader stepped forward, his voice cold and authoritative. "Hand over the evidence," he said, leveling a silenced pistol at them. "You've caused enough damage." Gerry lunged for the table, grabbing a nearby toolbox and hurling it toward the intruders. The distraction gave him and Laura a split second to dart toward the back exit. Shots rang out, the silenced rounds thudding into the walls as they sprinted down the narrow alley behind the unit. "Run!" Gerry shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. Laura clutched the bag tightly as they zigzagged through the maze of storage units, the sound of footsteps and shouts closing in behind them. They reached a chain-link fence at the perimeter of the lot. Gerry boosted Laura over before scrambling up himself, the fabric of his jacket tearing as he landed on the other side. "They won't stop," Laura said, breathless. "We have to keep moving," Gerry replied, grabbing her arm. "We're not letting them win." Once they reached a safe distance, Gerry and Laura regrouped in an abandoned warehouse, the only refuge they could find. Laura's hands trembled as she opened the laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. "We can't run forever," she said. "They'll keep finding us. The only way to end this is to release everything, all at once to everyone." Gerry hesitated. "What if they trace it back to us? What if they come after your family?" Laura met his gaze, her expression steely. "They already know who we are. They've made it clear there's no going back. But if we don't do this, everything we've sacrificed will mean nothing." Gerry nodded. "Let's do it." Using an encrypted satellite connection, they uploaded the complete archive of evidence to hundreds of platforms simultaneously. Social media sites, independent journalism outlets, encrypted forums, and even whistleblower platforms like WikiLeaks. The files included the full audio tapes, unedited, revealing the cold, calculated conversations about staging the moon landing and silencing dissenters. High-resolution photos of the lunar set, showing lighting rigs, scaffolding, and crew members in spacesuits. Memos detailing the extensive coordination between NASA, the military, and Hollywood to create the illusion of the Apollo 11 mission. Financial records tracing millions in funding to black-budget projects tied to surveillance and weapons development. Within minutes, the evidence went viral. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. The final leak shattered any remaining doubt about the authenticity of the moon landing. Protesters flooded the streets in every major city, demanding accountability from their governments. NASA's credibility crumbled overnight, with its top officials resigning en masse. Congressional hearings turned into public trials, where former NASA employees and military contractors were grilled about their roles in the conspiracy. Internationally, the scandal sparked outrage. The Soviet Union demanded reparations for being misled during the space race, while European and Asian nations called for an overhaul of global space exploration policies. Amid the chaos, the truth became undeniable. The moon landing had been staged, and the cover-up had shaped decades of global politics. Gerry and Laura disappeared from public view after the final release. The media speculated wildly about their fate, with some claiming they had gone into hiding and others suggesting they had been eliminated by those they exposed. Their evidence, however, lived on. It became the cornerstone of a movement for greater transparency and accountability in government and science. NASA, now a shell of its former self, was reorganized under strict oversight. The United States pledged to rebuild its credibility by launching new, verifiable missions to the moon and beyond. But for many, the damage was already done. Trust in institutions had been irreparably shaken, and humanity's greatest achievement had been revealed as its greatest lie. Months later, an encrypted video surfaced online. In it, Gerry and Laura sat side by side in a nondescript room, their faces tired but resolute. "We didn't do this to destroy NASA or discredit science," Gerry said. "We did it because the truth matters, because people deserve to know when their trust has been betrayed." Laura added, "This was never just about the moon landing. It was about power, who wields it, and who gets to decide what's real. We exposed the lie, but it's up to you to ensure it doesn't happen again." The video ended with a simple message: seek the truth. Demand accountability. Never stop questioning. Years later, the story of the moon landing conspiracy remained a cautionary tale. It became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of transparency in an age of disinformation. For Gerry and Laura, their sacrifice had changed the world. The truth they exposed had shaken humanity to its core, but it had also planted the seeds of a new era, one where the pursuit of truth became the greatest mission of all.